Okay, guys. So, the next question is, who does your book "Why Me"? Who does it speak to? Did you have a specific or broad audience in mind when creating this audiobook?
Well, basically, it only speaks to everybody who cares about freedom and justice, and people that around the city, around the state, around the country that know me can really understand me and what my plight has been like. That's why I was telling Dalonte, this is a book about, everybody who's concerned about what happens to the justice system, or also to young activists themselves, to say this is things that could happen to you when you speak out about freedom and justice. And I talk about the plight coming up in elementary school, high school, college, running for office, in my community, especially in the African American community, where where I started at. And so this is to me, especially for young activists, to understand the plight and what it takes to become an activist, and what are some of the problems that the people, as yourself as an activist, will have to address one day. There's some great things in the audiobook, but there's also some things that, like I said, me going to prison for something I didn't do, and other things that there's some things in there, what I talk about, you're going to go through. And I'm not the first one to go through this. I mean, if you listen to all the history and the documentaries about activism, from all the way from Martin Luther King, Reverend Bevel, Shuttlesworth, through individuals in the Civil Rights Movement, to the individuals in the 70s, how they went through the same thing. Those are my heroes, and so I understand when you look at the documentaries and the history books about activism, and basically I went through the same thing they went through coming up. So the audience it's individuals who want to understand activism, want to understand history, understand that what does today's generation of activism go through, leaders.
Just to add to what Daryl said, I think the book will also prick the conscience of Americans or whoever else who wants to listen to it, that they should be aware that these things are happening, and look at Daryl's story and say, like, even if they come to a conclusion that they disagree with some of the things that he says in the book, but bringing a type of awareness that these things do happen, and not getting people out of their comfort zones of thinking and being like shut off to a certain part of culture or a certain part of America that no one wants to have to deal with and stuff like that. So the book speaks to that too, in addition to what Daryl said, that he covers a range of things, from him growing up in the inner city, him being in jail, and like we go through his thoughts when he was in jail and stuff like that. So the person in prison could listen to it, the person who grew up in the hood, the ghetto, so forth, they can listen to it. The person who grew up in the suburbs, they can listen to it to make them aware that these things are happening in urban neighborhoods and outside of urban neighborhoods too.
And also for politicians who basically don't understand what's going on in the city, and to understand, who've never been in the city and understand activism, why activism, especially guys like me, speak out about certain issues, and what exactly we're going through. To me, what we covered in the audio book was like somewhat of a history of individuals, such a guy like me that grew up in the inner city, went to college, did the right thing, go to jail, come out, run for Congress and U.S. Senate, and become more of an activist around the city and around the state. So it's sort of somewhat of a history of my life. And so individuals who really would like to study history, would love this audio book.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to when I was 8, 9 years old.
And just a follow-up question before I ask you how long it took to create this project. You spoke about spoke about how this issue is not really talked about in the mainstream, significantly. Do you find like any particular authors or other authors or anybody else in the field that is addressing this sort of issue the way it needs to be, or?
Well, I think there's been a couple books. Well, I know one book that has been written probably the last year or so. The New Jim Crow Law. I forgot. Do you know the author who wrote that? She's a professor at Princeton, right?
No, she's a professor in Ohio.
Ohio, okay. And she wrote a book about it. It talks about how it doesn't specifically talk about Daryl's situation, but it does in general talk about how there is an injustice within the judicial system and things like that. So there are people, and I mean, you have activists like Cornel West and other activists too, like Daryl too, who have been sounding the alarm for years that there are injustices within the judicial system that has been happening. So it's more so like bringing this issue from a cultural context, I would say, that only black people go through this, and shifting the conversation to mainstream America, because you don't see this stuff being talked about in mainstream America. I mean, like I said, even if one comes to the conclusion that they don't believe what Daryl is saying or whatever, the issue still needs to be raised that this is a problem, and that there are people in jail for no reason. We release a couple of people every year. There was a man in Baltimore who got released. They say he murdered a woman. This was like a couple years ago. I forgot the dude's name. But they say he murdered some woman, and DNA tests, because we can test DNA now, got him off. He had already wasted 20 years of his life that he gave to the system. So I think it's I think the issue is to move. This book will help, if you like it or not, will try to move the conversation more into the mainstream, that we should be talking more about stuff like that.
And it's also Lynn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune that has me in one of his articles when he had the Princeton, they had a forum in Princeton on the problem with race and justice system. And so Lynn Washington from the Philadelphia Tribune, we're now friends, and we talk about this issue. And there's other books that have been written. But for me, and from basically the city of Trenton, this is one of probably the first, I guess, audio book that has been talked about my issue and what people are going through in the city or in the state, that people wouldn't actually know. You could talk about other people that have been in prison, they got out, DNA, find out it was a lie. Around the country, and you look what happened in Chicago, it's in Baltimore, there's been instances in Philadelphia, Texas, California, but specifically for my situation, and the people actually know me, and we sent it out to about 30 different people who listened to the audiobook, and they liked it, and they was like, wow, we didn't actually know about what was really happening, and especially in the Mercer County justice system, New Jersey, and they were at all when they listened to the audiobook.